the Root and River definition is how other people experience what you believe. So I assume that people on this webinar understand that it's not a logo, it's not a color, but it's rather an experience of your own personal rooted beliefs or values or convictions. And so this is really like a bridging idea, that brand is the conduit through which we convey almost our soul, our spirit, the things that motivate us to other people. And then how they experience it is also part of the brand. So we may have one intention for that, but then the way the audience experiences it is another aspect of the brand. And those sort of play together to create brand, which goes to our at Root and River general thinking that brand is not a thing you do or something you design, but is an everyday practice. And so as we think about the year ahead, the year to come, we're really centering on this idea of, how can we share what we believe with other people? And then how can we craft an experience and then remain open to how that experience evolves for them? Mm-hmm. And that's a level set there.
So those of you that know us at Root and River, and that Misty as well, is that we see the world quite a bit differently. It's almost like the inverse. Like we say that your message isn't what people want to hear, your message is what your heart has to say to the world. We refer to what we do as intrinsic branding because it starts on the inside. Your audience isn't who you're looking for, it's who's looking for you, stuff like that. It's almost like the inverse of traditional thinking in this area. So similar thing here with the type of planning and forecasting that we teach our clients and what we practice ourselves, which is a practice of inquiry. This idea that planning is really about having the right questions, not the right answers. Mm-hmm. And what this is reflective of is a lot of planning comes around a time when there wasn't, as the common phrase is, so much VUCA in the world of volatility, uncertainty, chaos. And I know it's ambiguity, but I like saying anarchy for the A. And so there was a level of predictability. You think about this from a marketing standpoint, and I was thinking, again, this is kind of a question for Misty and Emily too, is what was predictable for you when your role was, when you were doing planning, what you're like, okay, we can lock in. I think not to answer for you, but one that came to mind is like planning for your conference. Like you knew that was going to happen. Yeah. And now we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what 2021 is going to bear. This practice of inquiry has always probably been the best way to do things. This goes back to ancient teachings, Plato, Socrates, Buddha, Jesus. I mean, all of that is inquiry-based thinking about the future. But to Emily and Misty, what was predictable for you when you were doing marketing planning in your corporate life?
For me, that's a phenomenal question. Like, what was predictable? For me, because we often really focused highly on the people that we wanted to draw towards us, their behaviors over the years became predictable for us. But it did take us a while to find our rhythm in that and what would attract the right ones that were forward thinking, that wanted to move the needle, that wanted growth, that weren't afraid of new technology. So as we defined ourselves and what we wanted to bring to the world, the predictability of who we were going to draw was a little bit easier. And then we also discovered that our audience was really fun, which was not predictable for us in the beginning. We're like, oh, they love to have fun. These are accountants that, typically people see from the outside world as very like rigid and a checklist, which they are in that capacity. But they also are people that love to have costume parties and be wild and crazy. And so when we would go out and have shirts that say, hey, be a badass, those shirts went like that because they're like, I want to be a badass. I was like, oh, go you. So once we started fine tuning that audience, then it became predictable. But until we fine tuned that audience, it was, kind of this discovery and inquiry and continue to ask questions to uncover the right audience for sure.
For me, I think what was predictable was that I was going to be like measured on this. And that's something that I, as a not a natural numbers person, avoid. Like I can create content plans and get into the crafting of the language and like the visuals. And I can not deal with the reality that I have a, you know, leadership team that's like, okay, so where's the growth and what does it look like and how are you going to get there? So I think that was that was predictable and I had to deal with that. Whereas I might have avoided it because it didn't play to one of my strengths in the past. But once I confronted that and I like let myself be scared of it and then dig into the data and look at where we were today on our website traffic, on our social interaction, I could see once the plan started to be executed, I could see, you know, I knew sort of where the levers were and what was, you know, how that strength could affect the weakness or the fear I had around being able to perform. But I think it's very predictable for any business that you have to measure what you're doing. And I learned this other beautiful aspect of data that like it can tell you what your audience, it can give you these great little clues of what your audience loves, like being silly, like Misty mentioned, that can be revealed in the way that they react to the content in the data if you're looking at the data regularly enough. So
Yeah, I think in my times, in the 2-3 stints I had as a CMO, the common predictability that I had was lack of resources. I could not, so that's just where I developed my bias that advertising is the last thing you do, not the first thing you do. I'm not saying that's always true, but it was true for me because we had no money really so also each interaction was priceless. If we got someone on the phone, oh, how great is that? We got an email, we got to make that count.
Yeah.
And especially integrating the brand story into the customer experience. That's how the 3 different brands that I was the CMO of, that's how we built the brands, 1 to an exit, and then 2 they're still in business. And, you know, where I went on to start Root and River with Emily. And I think that's an important thing to do, regardless if you're a solo entrepreneur, maybe you run a marketing team for a larger company. Starting from a place of being lean, like start from a place of what's the least amount of money I could spend for the maximum output or maximum impact here. Mm-hmm. And if you do that as a leader, especially when everyone is extremely budget conscious now in all sizes of companies, if you can in marketing come in, and I'm smiling because I remember this conversation I had when I was the CMO of this media company, where I came in and had a conversation with the CEO, and I'm like, we need to cut our budget, our event budget by 50% because it's not going to work. I'd rather not spend it or spend it on something else. And he was incredulous because that was his pet idea to do that. And so it's that mindset, kind of scrappy or grassroots, like those are good. Word of mouth is good. That's what you want here. If you could build that into your plan, you're way ahead of everyone that's got these super rigid, predictable, in quotes, plans.
Mm-hmm. I love that, Justin. I so agree. There's, for me, like no matter what budget I had, whether it was 60,000 or 60 million, I always approached it as if it was my dollars and was super conservative and tried to figure out, okay, how can we do everything really scrappy, but excellent at that scrappy funness? And so I think that challenge, especially with social and all of the things that we have to reach our audience, that is a no cost barrier, is kind of really fun to play with and figure out all your analytics there and dive into the numbers.